They thought I was just another senile old man they could manipulate. They looked at my worn jacket, my trembling hands, my slow gait, and they saw an easy mark. What they didn't see was 40 years of strategic thinking, a mind sharpened by decades of negotiation, and a memory that never forgot a slight. My name is Arthur Brennan, I'm 73 years old, and this is the story of how I destroyed the people who tried to steal everything I'd spent a lifetime building. But before I tell you how I took them down, you need to understand how it all began. Because revenge, real revenge, isn't about anger. It's about patience, precision, and making sure your enemy never sees the trap until it's already closed around them. The day I realized something was wrong started like any other Tuesday, except for one tiny detail that would unravel everything. It was a Tuesday morning in March when I first suspected something wasn't right. I remember because Tuesdays were when I always went to Riverside Community Bank to check my accounts. Not because I didn't trust online banking, though I'll admit, I preferred doing things the old-fashioned way, but because it gave me a reason to leave the house, to feel the spring air, to remind myself I was still alive after Margaret passed. The bank was a modest building on Elm Street, the kind of place that had served our town for 60 years. I'd banked there since 1975, when I opened my first account with my first real paycheck. Over the decades, I'd watched it grow, watched the town grow around it. My savings account, my business account from when I ran my contracting firm, Margaret's trust fund for our grandchildren, everything was there. $347,000. Not a fortune by today's standards, but it represented every sacrifice, every extra shift, every penny saved from 40 years of honest work. I walked in that Tuesday with my worn leather folder containing my account statements. The young teller, Jessica, usually greeted me with a warm smile. But that morning, something was different. Her smile seemed forced, her eyes kept darting toward the manager's office, and when I asked for a balance inquiry on my primary savings account, she hesitated. "Just one moment, Mr. Brennan," she said, her voice higher than usual. That hesitation, maybe 2 seconds longer than normal, was the first thread. I waited, watching her fingers fly across her keyboard. Behind me, the bank was quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of a printer. Mrs. Chen was at the other counter, depositing coins from her bakery. Everything seemed normal, but that tiny hesitation had set something off in my mind, an alarm bell from years of reading people in business negotiations. Jessica printed out my statement and handed it to me, still with that strained smile. "Everything looks good, Mr. Brennan. Have a wonderful day." I took the paper, folded it into my leather folder, and left. But I didn't go home. Instead, I sat in my old Buick in the parking lot and opened the statement properly for the first time. The balance was correct, $234,512. The transactions looked normal, my pension deposit, the utility withdrawal, the automatic payment to the gardening service. Nothing unusual. Except there was something unusual. A small notation at the bottom of the page, in tiny print, account restructuring fee, $125. 00, monthly maintenance for premium senior services. That $125 fee was the crack in their facade. And once you find one crack, you start seeing them everywhere. I'd never authorized any premium senior services. I'd never even heard of such a thing. And $125 a month? That was $1,500 a year. For what? Most people would have shrugged it off. Gone inside, asked about it, probably accepted whatever explanation the bank offered. But I wasn't most people. 40 years of running a contracting business had taught me that small unexplained charges were never accidents. They were tests. Someone was testing to see if I was paying attention. I drove home slowly, my mind already working through the implications. If they were taking $125 monthly, and I hadn't noticed it until now, how long had it been going on? I kept meticulous records at home. Margaret used to tease me about my filing system, so the moment I got back to my house, I went straight to my office. My home office was in the converted attic, walls lined with filing cabinets containing 40 years of financial records. I pulled out my bank statements for the past year and spread them across my desk. The afternoon sun came through the skylight, illuminating the papers like evidence at a crime scene. January, $125 fee. February, $125 fee. March, $125 fee. I went back further. The fee had started in September of the previous year. 6 months. $750, vanished under a vague description that I'd never questioned because I'd been too wrapped up in grief after Margaret's funeral to pay proper attention to my finances. But that wasn't all. As I examined the statements more carefully, I found other small charges. A document processing fee of $50 in October. An account security upgrade of $75 in December. A portfolio management advisory charge of $95 in February. Someone had been salami slicing my account, taking thin slices so small that each one seemed hardly worth questioning, but which added up to over $2,000 in 6 months. I sat back in my chair, fingers steepled, staring at the evidence spread before me. The house was silent except for the ticking of Margaret's grandmother clock in the hallway below. That clock had been with us through everything: our wedding, the birth of our daughter, the growth of my business, Margaret's illness. It kept perfect time, just as I kept perfect records. And those records were telling me something was very wrong at Riverside Community Bank. But these fees were just the surface. The real scheme was so much deeper, and I was about to stumble onto something that would make my blood run cold. The next morning, I didn't go to the bank. Instead, I went to the town library and asked to use their computer. I knew the bank monitored account activity, and I didn't want them to know I was digging into their practices. At my age, people assume you're technologically illiterate, which made my research easier. The librarian, a kind woman named Paula, simply showed me to a terminal and left me alone. I spent 4 hours searching for information about Riverside Community Bank. What I found made the small fees seem almost quaint. In the past 3 years, the bank had been acquired by a larger regional institution called Vertex Financial Group. The acquisition had been quiet, barely mentioned in local news. Vertex had a concerning history: multiple lawsuits in other states involving predatory lending practices, elderly financial abuse, and unauthorized account modifications. Most cases had been settled out of court with non-disclosure agreements. But lawsuits leave traces. I found court filings, complainant testimonies, and pattern descriptions in consumer protection databases. The scheme was always similar: target elderly customers, particularly those who'd recently lost a spouse, implement small unauthorized fees that escalated over time, and eventually convince the customer to move their money into managed investment accounts, with enormous hidden fees and commissions. The endgame wasn't the small monthly charges. Those were just the setup. The real target was convincing Marks, and that's what we were to them, Marks, to sign over their entire savings to be professionally managed. Once the money was in these special accounts, it would be drained through management fees, trading commissions, and other charges until there was almost nothing left. I printed everything I could find, paid for the copies with quarters, and drove home with a manila folder full of evidence. That evening, I called my daughter, Rebecca. She lived 2 hours away in the city with my son-in-law, David, and my 2 grandchildren. We talked every week, but I hadn't mentioned anything about the bank. I didn't want to worry her, and more importantly, I didn't want anyone to know I was investigating yet. "Hi, Dad," she answered, her voice warm. "How are you doing?" "I'm well, sweetheart. Listen, I have a question. That financial advisor you and David use, are you happy with them?" "Mr. Patterson?" "Yes, he's been great." "Why do you ask?" "Just thinking about the future. Someone at the bank mentioned they offer investment management services. I wanted to know if that's something people actually use or if it's unnecessary." There was a pause. "Dad, you've always managed your own finances. Is something wrong?" I'd raised a perceptive daughter. "Nothing's wrong. Just exploring options. But tell me honestly, would you ever let your bank manage your investments?" "Not unless I absolutely trusted them and understood every fee involved. David's father got burned by something similar years ago. High management fees ate up most of his returns. We prefer working directly with an independent fiduciary advisor. They're legally required to act in your best interest. And bank investment managers aren't required to do that." "Not always. They can act in the bank's best interest instead of yours. It's a whole different regulatory framework." "Dad, seriously, what's going on?" I assured her everything was fine, that I was just being cautious, and we moved on to talk about the grandchildren. But after we hung up, I sat in my living room as darkness fell, and I began to formulate a plan. They had made a critical mistake. They assumed I was isolated, vulnerable, easy prey. They had no idea I was about to build a case that would expose everything. The next day was Wednesday. I drove to Riverside Community Bank at exactly 10 o'clock in the morning. I'd chosen this time deliberately. Mid-morning meant the branch manager, a man named Derek Hoffman, would likely be available. I'd done business with Derek years ago when he was just a loan officer. He'd helped finance an expansion of my contracting business. We'd shaken hands on that deal, and I'd always paid everything back ahead of schedule. I wondered if Derek remembered that handshake. I wondered if he knew what his bank was doing to its elderly customers. The bank was moderately busy. I waited in the small seating area until Jessica called me over to her window. I smiled warmly at her. "Good morning, Jessica. I'd like to speak with Mr. Hoffman if he's available." "Nothing urgent, just have a few questions about my accounts." She nodded, picked up her phone, and after a brief conversation, directed me to his office. Derek's office had a large window overlooking the main floor, a desk that was too modern for the building's traditional architecture, and walls decorated with motivational posters about financial wellness and secured futures. Derek stood when I entered, extending his hand with a broad smile. He was in his early 40s, wearing an expensive suit that seemed out of place for a small-town bank branch. His watch was a Rolex. I noticed these things. "Arthur. Great to see you. Please, sit down. What can I do for you today?" I settled into the chair across from his desk, placing my leather folder on my lap. "Derek, I was reviewing my statements and noticed some charges I don't recall authorizing. Wanted to understand what they're for." His smile never wavered, but something shifted in his eyes. Of course, of course. Which charges are you concerned about?" I opened my folder and pretended to scan the papers, though I'd memorized every detail. "This, account restructuring fee, for premium senior services. What exactly is that?" "Ah, yes." Derek leaned forward, his enthusiasm seeming genuine. "That's actually a fantastic program we implemented last year. It provides enhanced protection for our senior customers, additional fraud monitoring, dedicated customer service, priority processing for transactions. It's been very popular. I don't recall signing up for it." "Well, for our valued long-term customers like yourself, we automatically enrolled everyone to ensure they had the best protection. It's really for your benefit, Arthur. I nodded slowly, as if processing this. And these other fees? Document processing, security upgrades. All part of ensuring your accounts remain secure and up to date with current banking regulations. The financial world has become so complex, you know. We're just making sure all our customers are protected. I let the silence stretch for a moment. Derek's smile started to look strained. Derek, I said finally, I've been a customer of this bank for almost 50 years. I don't remember ever being charged fees like this before. When did the bank's policy change? After the acquisition by Vertex Financial, we've been able to implement more robust services. Services I didn't ask for. The smile finally faded. Derek's expression became more businesslike. Arthur, I understand change can be concerning. But these services are industry standard now. Every major bank has similar programs. You're actually paying less than what other institutions charge for comparable coverage. It was a smooth lie, delivered with practiced confidence. I'd heard similar lies from subcontractors who thought I wouldn't check their work. I'd like these services cancelled, I said calmly. And I'd like the fees refunded. Derek's expression tightened. I'm afraid the fees are non-refundable as they're for services already rendered. But I can certainly cancel the ongoing charges if that's what you want. He paused, then leaned forward with renewed enthusiasm. Although, before you make that decision, I should mention we have an even better option that might interest you. And there it was, the real trap, baited and ready. But this time, I was the one setting traps. What option is that? I asked, keeping my voice neutral and curious. Derek pulled open a desk drawer and extracted a glossy brochure. Our Vertex Premier Wealth Management Service. For clients with your level of assets, we offer personalized investment management with a dedicated portfolio advisor. They handle everything: rebalancing, tax optimization, risk management. And the best part is, all those small fees you're concerned about, they disappear. You just have one simple, transparent management fee. I took the brochure, flipping through pages filled with graphs showing impressive returns, photos of smiling elderly couples on beaches, and lots of text about fiduciary responsibility and client-centered service. What's the management fee? I asked. Very competitive, just 2% annually of assets under management, plus a small performance incentive if the portfolio exceeds certain benchmarks. 2%. On my $347,000, that would be almost $7,000 per year, every year, regardless of performance. Plus whatever the performance incentive actually meant. That seems high, I said mildly. Actually, it's quite standard for personalized management. And consider what you get: a dedicated advisor, professional oversight, access to investment opportunities not available to retail customers. Many of our senior clients have moved their entire portfolios into this program and are sleeping much better at night knowing professionals are watching their money. I thought about the lawsuits I'd read about. I thought about the elderly customers in other towns who'd signed up for similar wealth management and watched their life savings dissolve in a fog of fees and poor investment choices. Can I take this home and review it? I asked, holding up the brochure. Absolutely. Take your time. Although, Derek glanced at his computer screen, I should mention we're running a promotion this month. If you enroll before the end of March, we waive the setup fee, which is normally $5,000. That's a significant savings. Of course, there was a time pressure. There was always time pressure when someone wanted you to make a decision before you could think clearly. I stood up, brochure in hand. I'll review this and let you know. Thank you for your time, Derek." He stood as well, extending his hand again. "Anytime, Arthur. We really value your business. And remember, we're here to help you secure your financial future." I shook his hand and left his office, maintaining the appearance of a confused old man considering his options. But inside, my mind was cold and clear. I now understood the full scope of their scheme. The small fees were designed to confuse and frustrate elderly customers until they agreed to the solution of wealth management, which was really just a more efficient way to drain their accounts legally. As I walked through the bank lobby, I noticed something else. There was a new employee standing near the entrance, a young man in an expensive suit with a name tag reading, "Thomas Chen, Investment Consultant." He wasn't dressed like a bank employee. He was dressed like a shark. I had all the pieces now. But knowing the trap isn't enough, you have to spring it in a way that destroys them completely. And I had an idea that would do exactly that. For the next 3 weeks, I became someone I hadn't been in years, an investigator. Every morning, I woke at 6 o'clock, made my coffee the way Margaret used to make it, and went up to my attic office to work. First, I needed to know if I was the only target or if this was systemic. I started attending community events I'd previously avoided since Margaret's passing, the senior center's Tuesday lunches, the Wednesday morning coffee social at the Methodist Church, the Thursday afternoon book club at the library. At my age, you become invisible in these settings, people talk around you, forgetting you're listening. It took only 3 days to find the first victim. Her name was Dorothy Kemp, 81 years old, a retired schoolteacher who'd been widowed for 2 years. We were at the senior center, and she was complaining to her friend about how her bank account seemed to be shrinking despite her barely spending anything. "I don't understand it," Dorothy said, stirring sugar into her tea. "My pension comes in every month, same amount as always. I'm not buying anything extravagant. But somehow I have less money than I did last year." I approached their table with my lunch tray. "Mind if I join you ladies?" They welcomed me warmly. Dorothy remembered me from when I'd built an addition on her house 15 years ago. We chatted about grandchildren and the weather before I casually mentioned, "Dorothy, I couldn't help but overhear. What bank do you use?" "Riverside Community." "Same as always." "Why?" I explained that I'd noticed some unusual fees on my own accounts and wondered if she'd experienced anything similar. Her eyes widened. "Fees? Yes. All these little charges I don't understand. And that nice young man, Thomas, he came to my house last month and explained that I should move my money into some special investment account to avoid the fees. He was very persistent." My blood ran cold. "He came to your house?" "Oh yes, several times. He said he was checking on the bank's senior customers to make sure we were all taking advantage of their best services. I almost signed the papers, but my daughter happened to call while he was there and, well, she wasn't happy. She told him to leave and not come back." "Smart daughter," I said quietly. "Dorothy, did you keep any of the papers he gave you?" "I think so, somewhere in my desk." "Why?" "I'm collecting documentation about these fees. Building a case, you might say. Would you mind if I looked at them?" She agreed, and that afternoon I went to her house. In her desk, buried under old birthday cards and grocery lists, I found a contract for Vertex Premier Wealth Management Services. Reading through it made me angry enough that my hands shook. The contract was deliberately complex, full of legal jargon and cross-references to other documents. But buried in Section 17, subsection C, was the key clause: upon signing, the customer agreed to immediately transfer all funds from existing accounts into the managed portfolio, which would then be subject to the 2% annual fee, a one-time portfolio restructuring fee of 5%, quarterly rebalancing fees averaging 0.5%, and trading commissions on all transactions. In total, someone like Dorothy with about $200,000 in savings could expect to lose $20,000 in the first year alone, and $10,000 or more every year after. I almost signed this, Dorothy whispered, looking at the papers in my hands. He was so nice, so professional. He made it sound like I'd be foolish not to. You weren't foolish, I told her. You were being hunted. Over the next 2 weeks, I found 9 more victims. Not all of them banked at Riverside Community, but all of them had been targeted by Vertex Financial in some way. 3 had already signed over their assets, 6 had been approached but hadn't yet signed. 2 were so embarrassed about almost falling for it that they initially didn't want to talk to me. I documented everything. I created a spreadsheet. Yes, at 73 I knew how to use Excel, though I let people assume otherwise when it suited me, tracking each victim's name, their account balances, the fees they'd been charged, and the total amount Vertex was attempting to extract. The numbers were staggering. Just from the 12 people I'd identified, Vertex stood to extract over $1.2 million through their wealth management scheme. And this was just one small town. If they were running this operation across all their acquired banks, the total take could be in the tens of millions. But numbers alone wouldn't be enough. I needed more. The problem with modern fraud is that it's usually technically legal, buried in fine print and disclosure documents. But I was about to discover something that crossed a line they couldn't hide behind paperwork. On a Thursday evening, I received an unexpected phone call. The number was local, but I didn't recognize it. Is this Arthur Brennan? A young woman's voice, nervous. Yes, who's calling? My name is Jessica Martinez. I'm a teller at Riverside Community Bank. I need to talk to you about something, but I can't do it over the phone. Can we meet somewhere? My heart rate increased. What's this about? I can't explain now. But I saw you talking to Mr. Hoffman about those fees, and I have information you need to see. Tomorrow, 1 o'clock, at the coffee shop on Main Street. The one that's not connected to any bank. I'll be there, I said. That night I barely slept. Jessica had seemed genuinely frightened on the phone. What did she know? Why was she willing to risk her job to talk to me? The next afternoon, I arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early. I chose a table in the back corner where we could talk privately. When Jessica arrived, she looked around nervously before sitting down across from me. Thank you for meeting me, she said quietly. I wasn't sure you'd come. What do you need to tell me? She pulled out her phone, glanced around again, then showed me a photograph. It was a screenshot of what looked like an internal bank email. I could lose my job for this, she said. Worse, actually, I signed a pretty scary non-disclosure agreement when Vertex took over. But what they're doing, it's wrong, Mr. Brennan. Really wrong. The email was from Derek Hoffman to all branch employees. The subject line read, Q1 Senior Conversion Targets. My eyes scanned down through the text. Team, we're behind on our quarterly targets for converting senior accounts to Vertex Premier WM. Corporate is expecting at least 15 conversions per branch by March 31st, remember our training, focus on recently widowed clients, those showing signs of confusion or memory issues, and anyone with greater than $100,000 in liquid accounts. Use the fee frustration strategy we discussed. If they complain about the monthly charges, that's your opening to introduce Premier as the solution. Bonuses for top performers will be substantial. Let's finish Q1 strong. Derek. I read it twice, feeling rage build in my chest like a physical thing. They're specifically targeting widows and people with cognitive issues. Jessica nodded, her eyes glistening. It gets worse. I have more. She showed me 3 more screenshots. The first was a training document titled Identifying and Approaching Vulnerable Senior Clients. It included a checklist of indicators of susceptibility, recent spouse loss, mention of memory problems, limited family support, confusion about technology, resistance to change followed by sudden compliance. The second was a compensation structure showing that employees received substantial bonuses, up to $10,000, for each successful conversion to Premier Wealth Management, plus a percentage of the first-year fees. The third was a spreadsheet tracking every senior customer in the branch, with color-coded ratings, green for converted, yellow for in progress, and red for resistant. My name was highlighted in red with a note, high-value target, widow, large balance, initially resistant but showing interest. Use urgency tactics. Thomas assigned. Thomas Chen isn't even a real investment consultant, Jessica said. He's a contractor Vertex hires specifically to close these deals. He gets 20% of the first-year management fees for every account he brings in. Do you know what he made last quarter? $90,000. From vulnerable elderly people who trusted him. I stared at the photographs of these documents, my legal mind, honed from decades of contracts and negotiations, already analyzing what they meant. This is evidence of systematic elder financial abuse. They're not just selling a questionable service, they're deliberately targeting the most vulnerable people with tactics designed to exploit cognitive decline and grief. I know, Jessica whispered. And I've been part of it. Every time I see a confused senior customer, I'm supposed to flag them for Derek or Thomas. I can't do it anymore. That's why I'm here. I looked at this young woman, she couldn't have been more than 25, and saw genuine moral courage. She was risking her livelihood and potentially legal consequences to expose this. Jessica, can you send these documents to me? I'll need them in their original form, not just screenshots. She shook her head. I can't access them from outside the bank's network, and everything's monitored. These screenshots are all I could safely take. Then these screenshots will have to be enough. But I need you to be prepared, when this comes out, they'll know the leak came from inside the bank. I know. I've already been looking for other jobs. She paused. Mr. Brennan, are you going to go to the police? Eventually, I said. But first, I'm going to do something that will hurt them much worse than a police investigation. With Jessica's evidence, I had everything I needed. Now it was time to set the final trap, one that would be sprung in the most public, devastating way possible. That weekend, I made several important phone calls. The first was to my old friend Martin Torres, who'd retired from the State Attorney General's office 3 years ago. We'd worked together decades back when I'd served as an expert witness in a construction fraud case. Martin had always told me to call if I ever needed legal advice. Arthur. It's been too long. How are you holding up? I'm well, Martin. But I need your expertise. Hypothetically, if someone discovered evidence of systematic financial elder abuse by a bank, what would be the best way to expose it while ensuring maximum legal consequences for the perpetrators? There was a long pause. Hypothetically. For now. Martin's voice became serious. Walk me through what you found. I spent 45 minutes laying out everything, the unauthorized fees, the wealth management scheme, the targeting of vulnerable seniors, the internal documents Jessica had provided, the testimonies from other victims I'd interviewed. Martin listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then, Arthur, this is bigger than you realize. What you've described isn't just local fraud, it's potentially a pattern that could trigger federal investigation under the Elder Justice Act and various banking regulations. But you need to be careful about how you proceed. What do you recommend? First, document everything formally, notarized statements from victims, copies of all fees and contracts, those internal emails if possible. Second, file complaints with multiple agencies simultaneously, the State Banking Commission, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the State Attorney General. Third, and this is important, you need media coverage. Agencies move faster when there's public pressure. I was hoping you'd say that. My second call was to Rebecca, my daughter. This time, I told her everything. She was horrified, angry, and immediately wanted to drive down. Dad, you should have told me sooner. We need to get a lawyer. Rebecca, I need you to trust me. I'm handling this, but I need your help with something specific. You work in marketing, right? You understand social media. Yes, but I don't see what. How would someone create a video that could go viral? Something that would reach millions of people quickly. She was silent for a moment, processing. Dad, what are you planning? I'm planning to tell my story. But I want to make sure people hear it. Rebecca was skeptical at first, but as I explained my plan, I could hear the shift in her voice from concern to admiration. That's actually brilliant. Okay, here's what you need to do. She walked me through the basics: good lighting, clear audio, a strong hook at the beginning, an emotional arc, a call to action at the end. She recommended filming it as a straightforward testimony, no fancy editing, the authenticity would make it more powerful. But Dad, you're going to need help filming this. The quality matters. Let me come down this weekend with David. He's got a good camera and knows how to set up proper sound. My third call was to Dorothy Kemp and the other victims I'd identified. I explained my plan and asked if they'd be willing to provide recorded testimonies. 9 of them agreed immediately. The 3 who'd already lost significant money to the wealth management scheme were especially eager. I want other people to know what happened, Dorothy said. I want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Over the next week, I worked 18-hour days preparing. Rebecca and David drove down that weekend, and we spent Saturday filming. Not just my testimony, but statements from 5 other victims who were comfortable being on camera. We filmed in my living room, with Margaret's photographs visible in the background, a deliberate choice. I wanted viewers to understand these weren't abstract victims, we were real people with real lives. My testimony took 45 minutes to record. Rebecca said we'd edit it down, but when she reviewed the footage, she decided to keep it mostly intact. Dad, this is powerful as it is. We'll just tighten up a few sections and add some title cards to highlight key points. But your delivery is perfect, calm, detailed, devastating. People are going to be furious when they see this. While Rebecca worked on editing, I prepared the formal complaints. Martin had sent me templates and guidance. Each complaint was meticulously documented with evidence, copies of unauthorized fee charges, the wealth management contract Dorothy had nearly signed, statements from other victims, screenshots of Jessica's internal bank documents, and my own detailed timeline of discovery. I also did something else. I opened new accounts at 3 different banks, not to move my money yet, but to have options ready. I wanted to be prepared to extract every penny from Riverside Community Bank the moment my plan went into effect. Everything was ready. The evidence was compiled, the video was edited, the complaints were prepared. Now I just needed the perfect moment to detonate this bomb, and that moment came in the form of a home visit from Thomas Chen. On a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after my conversation with Derek Hoffman, my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and smiled coldly. Thomas Chin stood on my front porch, briefcase in hand, wearing another expensive suit. He'd called twice since my meeting with Derek, leaving voicemails about the limited-time opportunity to join Premier Wealth Management. I hadn't returned his calls, which had apparently prompted this house visit. I opened the door with my best confused elderly man expression. Yes. Can I help you? Mr. Brennan. Thomas Chen from Riverside Community Bank. We spoke on the phone. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by to see if you had any questions about the Premier Wealth Management Program. In the neighborhood was a lie. I lived on a dead-end street with only 4 houses. But I smiled and invited him in, offering coffee, playing the role of a lonely old man grateful for company. Thomas's sales pitch was masterful, I had to admit. He built rapport by asking about the photographs on my walls, expressing sympathy about Margaret's passing, commenting on how hard it must be to manage finances alone at my age. Then he smoothly transitioned to talking about security, and peace of mind, and making sure your grandchildren are taken care of. The truth is, Mr. Brennan, at your stage of life, you shouldn't have to worry about managing investments or understanding complex financial documents. That's what we're here for. You've worked hard your whole life, you deserve to enjoy your retirement without financial stress. I let him talk for 20 minutes, nodding occasionally, asking questions that made me sound uncertain and overwhelmed. And all the while, I was recording every word on my phone, which sat on the coffee table between us, its recording app hidden behind an innocuous weather display. Finally, Thomas pulled out the contract. I took the liberty of preparing the paperwork in advance, just to save time. All I need is your signature on these few pages, and we can have your accounts transferred by the end of the week. You'll immediately stop seeing all those confusing small fees, and instead you'll have one simple statement each quarter showing how your money is growing. He laid out the contract, flipping pages and pointing to signature lines, talking continuously to prevent me from actually reading the terms. It was a technique I recognized from disreputable subcontractors: keep talking, maintain pressure, don't let the mark think. What's the fee again? I asked, pen hovering over the signature line. Just 2% annually, which is very competitive. And that covers everything, all management, all trading, all advisory services. Much simpler than what you're dealing with now. 2% of $347,000 is, let me think. You don't need to calculate it, Mr. Brennan. We handle all that for you. That's the point. It's almost $7,000. Thomas's smile tightened slightly. It's an investment in professional management. And when you consider what you'd lose to those monthly fees otherwise. The fees I never authorized. His smile froze. Sorry. I set down the pen and looked at him directly, dropping the confused old man act like a mask I no longer needed. The fees I never authorized, I repeated, my voice now clear and cold. The premium senior services that were automatically enrolled without my consent. The document processing fees and security upgrades that appeared on my statement starting exactly 6 months ago, right after my wife died. Thomas's smile vanished completely. He straightened in his chair, his body language shifting from friendly salesman to cornered predator. Mr. Brennan, all of those services are outlined in the updated terms and conditions that were mailed to customers in 8-point font across 47 pages of legal jargon, buried in what looked like promotional material that most people throw away without reading. I picked up a folder from beside my chair, I'd had it ready the whole time. I kept mine. I keep everything. 40 years of running a business taught me that paper trails matter. Thomas glanced at the door, calculating. I think there's been a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding. Let me tell you what I understand perfectly. I leaned forward, My eyes locked on his. Vertex Financial acquired Riverside Community Bank 2 years ago. Since then, you've been systematically targeting elderly customers, particularly recent widows and widowers, charging unauthorized fees designed to frustrate them until they agree to transfer their assets into your wealth management program. A program with fees so excessive that you extract 10 to 15% of their life savings in the first year alone. Thomas stood up abruptly. I don't have to listen to these accusations. Sit down, Thomas. Something in my voice made him hesitate. I wasn't a confused old man anymore. I was someone who'd spent 40 years negotiating with contractors, dealing with labor disputes, managing crews of workers who tested boundaries. I knew how to project authority, and I used every bit of it now. Sit down, I repeated. Because I'm going to explain exactly what's going to happen, and you're going to want to hear this. He sat, slowly, his hand moving toward his briefcase. Don't touch that phone, I said. Not yet. First, you need to understand your situation. You see, for the past 3 weeks, I've been conducting an investigation. I've identified 12 victims in this town alone, elderly people you and Derek Hoffman have targeted. 3 of them already signed over their money. Do you know how much total? $1.2 million. That's just from 12 people in one small town. Thomas's face had gone pale. I don't know what you think you've discovered, but I have documentation of every unauthorized fee. I have copies of the wealth management contracts with their deliberately obscured fee structures. I have statements from victims. And most importantly, I have internal bank documents showing that you specifically target vulnerable seniors, that employees receive bonuses for successful conversions, and that you've been trained to identify people with cognitive issues as prime targets. His eyes widened. That's confidential bank information. How did you? How I obtained it doesn't matter. What matters is what I'm going to do with it. I picked up my phone from the coffee table and held it up. This conversation we just had. I recorded all of it. You can hear yourself on here using high-pressure sales tactics, discouraging me from reading the contract, and trying to get me to sign away management of my life savings to a program that would cost me thousands of dollars in fees I don't need to pay. Thomas shot to his feet again, genuinely panicked now. That's illegal. You can't record someone without their consent in this state. Actually, I can. This is a one-party consent state. Look it up. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I've already looked up quite a lot of things, Thomas. Including your background. Did you know that consumer protection advocates have a name for people like you? Financial predators. You specifically target the elderly and vulnerable. In some states, what you're doing is a felony. I'm leaving. He grabbed his briefcase. And you can expect to hear from our lawyers about those recording and whatever confidential documents you claim to have. Before you go, let me tell you what's going to happen next, I said calmly, not moving from my chair. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, formal complaints will be filed with the State Banking Commission, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and the State Attorney General's Office. All 3 complaints will include comprehensive documentation of Vertex Financial's predatory practices, including those internal documents showing systematic targeting of vulnerable seniors. Thomas had frozen halfway to the door. At 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, a video will be published online. It's a 40-minute testimony from me, explaining in detail what Vertex Financial did to my accounts, how they targeted me after my wife's death, and how their entire business model is built on exploiting grieving elderly people. The video also includes testimonies from 5 other victims, some of whom lost tens of thousands of dollars to your wealth management scheme. You can't. At 11 o'clock, that video will be sent to every major news outlet in the state, along with a press packet containing all the evidence I've compiled. I've already been in contact with a producer at the state's largest television station. They're very interested in running a story about a regional bank systematically defrauding elderly customers. Thomas's face had gone from pale to gray. He understood now, this wasn't a confused old man he could manipulate. This was a carefully planned destruction of everything Vertex had built in this region. And at noon tomorrow, I continued, standing up now, I'm going to walk into Riverside Community Bank and close every account I have. I'm going to do it loudly, in front of every customer in the building. And I'm going to tell everyone there exactly why I'm leaving and what this bank tried to do to me. Thomas thought he could threaten me with lawyers. He had no idea that I'd already consulted with someone far more dangerous to them than any defense attorney. You're making a mistake, Thomas said, his voice shaking slightly. Vertex Financial has an entire legal department. They'll bury you in lawsuits. They'll tie you up in court for years. Let them try. I'm 73 years old. I have no debt, a paid-off house, and more than enough money to fund a legal battle. More importantly, I have something they don't, the truth, comprehensive documentation, and nothing left to lose. My wife is gone. My daughter is settled. My grandchildren are young enough that they won't remember any scandal. What exactly do you think you can threaten me with? Thomas stared at me, and I saw the moment he realized he had no leverage. People like him relied on their victims being afraid of confrontation, afraid of legal trouble, afraid of looking foolish. But I wasn't afraid. I was angry, and I'd spent 3 weeks channeling that anger into something precise and devastating. There is one way this doesn't happen, I said. You go back to Derek Hoffman today, right now, and you tell him that I've compiled evidence of elder financial abuse that will destroy Vertex Financial's reputation in this state. Tell him that I have internal documents proving systematic targeting of vulnerable seniors. And tell him that I want a meeting with someone from Vertex's corporate office who has the authority to make decisions. What kind of decisions? Full refunds of all unauthorized fees to every customer in this town. Cancellation of all existing wealth management contracts with full return of assets and reimbursement of fees charged. A formal written apology. And, this is non-negotiable, immediate cessation of these predatory practices at all Vertex-owned banks. Thomas laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. They'll never agree to that. Do you know how much money that would cost them? Less than what multiple state investigations, federal regulatory action, and a massive publicity scandal would cost them. Much less. But they have to decide quickly. You have until 5 o'clock this afternoon to get me a meeting with corporate. Otherwise, everything I described happens tomorrow morning at 9. That's extortion, Thomas said. No, that's consequences. Extortion would be if I wanted money for myself. I don't want a penny, I want justice for the people you've victimized, and I want you stopped before you ruin more lives. I walked to the front door and opened it. 5 o'clock, Thomas. Tell Derek I'll be waiting for his call. Thomas walked out without another word, and I watched him through the window as he sat in his car for 5 full minutes, presumably calling Derek, before finally driving away. I closed the door and allowed myself one moment of shaking hands and rapid heartbeat. Then I went upstairs to my office and began preparing for the next phase. I'd given them a way out, but I knew these people. Predators don't stop because you ask nicely. They stop when you make the cost of continuing too high to bear. And I was about to show them exactly how high that cost could be. Derek Hoffman called at 4:47 p.m. I let it ring 3 times before answering, maintaining control of even these small psychological details. Arthur, I think we need to talk. Derek's voice was strained, trying to sound reasonable. Thomas shared some concerns about your meeting today. I think there might be some misunderstandings we can clear up. No misunderstandings, Derek. I was very clear with Thomas. Did you arrange a meeting with corporate? I've been in contact with our regional director, Marcus Vega. He'd like to meet with you tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock at the bank to discuss your concerns. Not at the bank. Neutral location. The conference room at the public library, I've already reserved it. And I want Marcus Vega to bring someone from Vertex's legal department and someone with actual decision-making authority regarding customer accounts and company policy. There was a pause. Arthur, these demands are. Those are my terms, Derek. 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, public library conference room. If they're not there, I proceed with filing complaints and releasing the video. You have 13 hours to make it happen. The video, what exactly are you threatening to release? Not threatening, Derek. I've already made it. 40 minutes of testimony detailing everything Vertex Financial has done, backed up by documentation and statements from other victims. It's edited, captioned, and ready to upload. The only question is whether it goes public tomorrow or whether Vertex chooses to make this right first. You can't just, Derek stopped himself. Let me make some calls. I'll confirm the meeting details by 8 p.m. Derek called back at 7:52 p.m. Marcus Vega will be there tomorrow at 10. He's bringing Jennifer Koh from legal and Sarah Chen, who's vice president of regional operations. They have authority to discuss resolutions. Good. I'll see you all tomorrow. That night, I didn't sleep. I went over every document one more time, rehearsed my presentation, double-checked that backup copies of everything were stored safely both digitally and physically. Rebecca called at midnight. Dad, are you sure about this? These people play hardball. What if they try to intimidate you? Rebecca, I spent 40 years in construction. I've dealt with mob-connected unions, crooked inspectors, and contractors who thought threats would make me back down. I know how to handle intimidation. I paused. But I need you to do something for me. If this meeting goes badly, if they somehow manage to suppress the evidence or come after me legally, I need you to be ready to release that video immediately. You gave me access to the file. It's ready to go if you need it. Thank you, sweetheart. And Rebecca? I love you. Your mother would be proud of what we're doing. She really would, Rebecca said quietly. Get some sleep, Dad. Tomorrow you're going to need to be sharp. But I couldn't sleep. I sat in my attic office, surrounded by 40 years of meticulous records, and thought about Margaret. She'd always said I was stubborn to a fault, that I never let go of something once I knew I was right. She'd meant it as gentle criticism, but right now, that stubbornness was my greatest weapon. Morning came, and with it, the moment of truth. I arrived at the library 30 minutes early, carrying 2 briefcases full of evidence. This was going to end one of 2 ways, with Vertex's surrender or with their complete destruction. I was prepared for either. The library's conference room was a plain space with a large table, fluorescent lighting, and windows overlooking the town square. I arrived at 9:30 and spent 20 minutes arranging my materials, organized stacks of documents, each labeled and tabbed, my laptop queued up with the video file, and my phone fully charged and recording. Marcus Vega arrived at 9:58 with an entourage. He was younger than I expected, maybe 45, wearing a suit that probably cost more than some people's monthly rent. Jennifer Koh was a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s, carrying a leather portfolio. Sarah Chen appeared to be in her 50s, with the careful expression of someone who'd spent years in corporate damage control. Derek Hoffman trailed behind them, looking like he'd aged 5 years overnight. They settled on one side of the table. I sat alone on the other, a deliberate choice. Sometimes appearing outnumbered makes your opponents overconfident. Marcus spoke first, his tone professional but with an undertone of condescension. "Mr. Brennan, thank you for meeting with us. I understand you have some concerns about your banking experience with Riverside Community. We take customer satisfaction very seriously, and I'm confident we can find a resolution that works for everyone." "Let's be clear about what this is," I said. "This isn't a customer service issue. This is a meeting to determine whether Vertex Financial takes responsibility for systematic elder financial abuse, or whether I proceed with regulatory complaints, media exposure, and a public campaign to shut down your predatory practices." Jennifer Coe leaned forward. "Mr. Brennan, I need to caution you about making defamatory statements. The terms financial abuse and predatory practices are serious legal accusations, which I can substantiate with comprehensive documentation." I slid a thick folder across the table. "That's a summary of evidence I've compiled. Internal bank documents showing deliberate targeting of vulnerable seniors. Statements from 12 victims in this town alone. Analysis of fee structures designed to confuse and frustrate elderly customers. Transcripts of high-pressure sales tactics. Everything is documented, dated, and verified." Marcus flipped through the folder, his expression unchanging, but I saw Jennifer's face tighten as she read over his shoulder. "These internal documents, where did you obtain these?" Jennifer asked. "That's not relevant. What's relevant is their contents. You have employees specifically trained to identify customers with cognitive issues, recent widows and widowers, people who appear confused or overwhelmed. You have bonus structures that incentivize pushing elderly customers into high-fee investment programs. You have documented strategies for creating fee frustration to manufacture consent for wealth management services that your customers neither need nor understand." Sarah Chin spoke for the first time, her voice carefully controlled. "Mr. Brennan, I think you may be misinterpreting some standard banking practices and employee training materials. I ran a business for 40 years, Ms. Chin. I know the difference between standard practices and predatory behavior. What you're doing isn't banking, it's exploitation with a corporate logo." Marcus set down the folder. "Let's say, hypothetically, that some of our practices could be improved. What exactly are you asking for?" "I gave Thomas my terms yesterday. Full refunds of all unauthorized fees to every affected customer. Cancellation of existing wealth management contracts with complete return of assets and reimbursement of fees. Formal written apology to all affected customers. Immediate cessation of these targeting practices across all Vertex-owned institutions." Jennifer Coe shook her head. "That's completely unrealistic. You're talking about potentially millions of dollars in refunds and foregone revenue. I'm talking about returning money you had no right to take in the first place." Marcus raised a hand, silencing Jennifer. "Mr. Brennan, let's be practical. You've clearly put a lot of work into this, and I respect that. But Vertex Financial is a multi-billion-dollar corporation with extensive legal resources. If you proceed with complaints and public accusations, we'll defend ourselves vigorously. This could take years of litigation, cost you enormous amounts in legal fees, and there's no guarantee of any outcome favorable to you." There it was, the implicit threat I'd been expecting. I smiled coldly. "Mr. Vega, I'm going to explain something to you about leverage. You're used to dealing with elderly customers who are afraid of confrontation, afraid of looking foolish, afraid of expensive lawyers. You're used to people who will back down when threatened. But I'm not afraid of your lawyers, your litigation, or your billion-dollar corporation." I opened my laptop and turned it to face them. On the screen was the video, paused on a frame showing my face in clear, well-lit detail. This video is 40 minutes long. In it, I explain exactly what Vertex Financial did, not in legal jargon, but in plain language that any person can understand. I show actual bank statements with unauthorized fees. I read from your internal documents about targeting vulnerable seniors. And then 5 other victims tell their stories. Dorothy Kemp, who nearly signed over her $200,000 in savings because your employee made house calls and pressured her while she was grieving her husband. Robert Martinez, who lost $15,000 in fees in just 8 months. Helen Pritchard, whose grandson had to intervene when she was halfway through signing papers she didn't understand. I let them absorb that, then continued. This video is optimized for viral spread. My daughter works in marketing. She made sure it has captions, clear audio, emotional hooks, and all the elements that make content shareable. When this goes live, it won't just be watched by a few hundred people. It'll reach hundreds of thousands, possibly millions. Because people are angry about corporate greed, about the elderly being exploited, about banks that put profits over people. Marcus thought he could intimidate me with legal threats. But I'd built my entire trap around one simple truth: the court of public opinion moves faster than any courtroom, and it's far more devastating. Sarah Chen was now looking genuinely worried. Mr. Brennan, even if you release this video, we can issue a counter-statement, present our side. Your side? I leaned forward. Your side is that you deliberately target grieving widows and people with memory issues to sell them unnecessary high-fee investment products. That's your defense. We provide legitimate investment services. At 2% annual management fees plus additional trading commissions and rebalancing fees, totaling over 10% of assets in the first year. All sold through high-pressure tactics to people who are specifically selected for their vulnerability. I pulled out another document. I had a financial advisor review your wealth management contracts. His analysis concluded that your fee structure is in the top 1% of most expensive in the industry, with no corresponding superior performance. In fact, customer portfolios in your managed accounts underperformed simple index funds by an average of 3% annually after accounting for your fees. Marcus's professional mask was starting to crack. You can't prove systematic targeting. I can prove it with your own internal emails and training documents. The ones that explicitly tell employees to look for indicators of susceptibility, including recent spouse loss and signs of confusion. The ones that call us high-value targets. I tapped the folder. It's all in there. Jennifer Coe was now typing rapidly on her phone, probably messaging Vertex's corporate counsel. Derek Hoffman looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice level and cold. In approximately, I checked my watch, 3 hours and 40 minutes, unless I receive a satisfactory agreement from you, 3 things will occur simultaneously. First, formal complaints will be filed with multiple regulatory agencies. Second, this video will be published on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and several other platforms. Third, press packets will be sent to every major news outlet in the state, along with the video link. You're not giving us time to even review this properly or consult with our board, Sarah began. You've had 3 weeks, I interrupted. Ever since I started investigating. You've had 3 weeks to notice that an elderly customer was digging into your practices, asking questions, documenting everything. You could have stopped then. You could have proactively reached out to discuss my concerns. Instead, you sent Thomas Chen to my house yesterday to try to close the deal with high-pressure sales tactics while I recorded the entire conversation. I played 30 seconds of the recording, Thomas's voice clearly using manipulative language, discouraging me from reading the contract, creating false urgency with claims about limited time offers. That recording will be included in the regulatory complaints as evidence of predatory sales practices, I said. Along with everything else. The room was silent except for the faint sound of Jennifer's typing. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice tight. What would a satisfactory agreement look like to you? I already told you. Full refunds, contract cancellations, reimbursements, and policy changes. But I'll add one more term, a $100,000 donation to the local senior center for financial literacy programs. Real programs, taught by independent financial advisors, not your employees. Programs that will teach elderly people how to spot and avoid exactly the kind of predatory tactics you've been using. That's extortion, Jennifer started. No, that's restitution and public benefit. Extortion would be asking for personal payment. I don't want a penny for myself. I want you to stop victimizing people and to undo the damage you've already caused. Marcus and Jennifer huddled together, speaking in low voices. Sarah joined them. Derek sat separately, staring at the table. This went on for 5 minutes. Finally, Marcus turned back to me. We need time to review this with corporate counsel and our board of directors. These aren't decisions I can make unilaterally. You have until 1 o'clock. That's 2.5 hours. After that, everything goes public and you'll be dealing with regulatory investigations, media scrutiny, and a public relations nightmare while trying to negotiate. The offer will also be off the table. Once I go public, there's no walking this back. That's unreasonable. What's unreasonable is stealing from elderly people and thinking there wouldn't be consequences. I stood up. 2.5 hours. My phone number is in that folder. When you're ready to discuss terms, call me. If I don't hear from you by 1 p.m., you'll hear from me in the form of a viral video that will be playing in every newsroom in the state by tomorrow morning. I gathered my materials, closed my briefcases, and walked to the door. As I reached it, Marcus called out, Mr. Brennan, if we agree to your terms, we'll need assurances that you won't pursue further legal action or media exposure. I turned back. If you agree to my terms in full, in writing, and you actually follow through with refunds and policy changes, then I'll have no reason to pursue further action. The video will remain unreleased, the complaints won't be filed, and your reputation will be damaged but salvageable. But, and this is critical, if you agree and then fail to follow through, or if I discover you're continuing these practices at other locations, then everything goes public immediately with the additional story of how you tried to cover it up. How do we know you won't release it anyway? Because unlike your corporation, I keep my word. I'm not interested in destruction for its own sake. I'm interested in justice and in making sure other people don't suffer what I and others in this town have suffered. I left them in the conference room and walked out into the bright morning. My hands were steady, my mind was clear, and I felt more alive than I had in months. I'd laid out everything, evidence, consequences, terms. Now came the waiting. 2.5 hours to see if corporate greed could be overcome by fear of exposure. I went to get coffee, because regardless of their decision, I'd already won. I didn't go home. Instead, I drove to the small diner on Main Street where I used to have breakfast with Margaret on Sunday mornings. I ordered coffee and sat in our usual booth by the window, watching the town square. At 11:47 a.m., my phone rang. Marcus Vega. Mr. Brennan, we've discussed your demands with our corporate counsel and executive team. We're prepared to offer a settlement. I'm listening. We'll refund all fees charged to customers in the past 12 months at the Riverside Community Branch. We'll cancel any existing wealth management contracts for customers who want out, with full asset return. And we'll make a $50,000 donation to the Senior Center for Financial Education. That's half of what I asked for. And it doesn't address the ongoing practices or include a formal apology. It's a generous offer, Mr. Brennan. Take it, or face the uncertainty of regulatory processes and litigation. I sipped my coffee, letting him wait. Mr. Vega, I don't think you understand your position. Your generous offer is an admission that you've been stealing from elderly customers. The moment you agree to refund fees and cancel contracts, you're confirming that those fees were improper and those contracts were problematic. Do you really want to make a partial admission of guilt while keeping half the money and continuing the same practices elsewhere? We're not admitting guilt. Then why are you refunding anything? If the fees were legitimate and the contracts were proper, you'd refuse and fight this in court. But you know that's a losing battle. You know that the moment this gets in front of a jury, elderly customers testifying about being manipulated after losing their spouses, internal documents showing targeting strategies, recorded evidence of high-pressure tactics, you'll lose. And you'll lose much more than what I'm asking for now. There was muffled conversation on his end. Then, if we agree to your full terms, we need absolute assurance that this ends here. No media, no complaints, no video. I told you my terms. Meet them in full, in writing, with a timeline for implementation, and I have no reason to proceed with public action. But I want verification, monthly reports showing that refunds have been issued, that contracts have been cancelled, that policies have changed. And if I hear about similar practices at any Vertex-owned institution, anywhere, the video goes public immediately. More muffled conversation. We need this in writing, a formal agreement with mutual releases. Fine. Draft it. But Mr. Vega, I want it done right. I'll have my attorney review every word. Any attempt to include language that lets you off the hook or limits accountability for future actions, and we're back to option 2, full public exposure. We'll have something to you by 5 p.m. Make it 4 p.m. I want time to review it properly. At 3:47 p.m., I received an email with a 12-page settlement agreement. I immediately forwarded it to Martin Torres, who called me 20 minutes later. Arthur, this is actually pretty clean. They're agreeing to everything you asked for, full refunds, contract cancellations with fee reimbursements, policy changes, the donation, even a formal written apology to affected customers. There's a standard confidentiality clause, but it only applies to the settlement terms themselves, not to the underlying facts. You could still speak publicly about what happened if you wanted to, you just couldn't disclose the specific terms of this agreement. What about enforcement? There's a clause allowing for independent verification that they've followed through on refunds and policy changes. If they breach any terms, the confidentiality clause becomes void and you're free to release everything. It's actually more favorable than I would have expected them to offer. They're scared, I said. They know how bad this could get. I signed the agreement electronically at 4:31 p.m. and sent it back. By 6 p.m., I received confirmation that Vertex's CEO had signed it as well. I'd won, but winning wasn't enough. I needed to see it through, to make sure they actually followed through on their promises. Because trust, once broken, can never be fully repaired. Over the next 6 weeks, I watched Vertex Financial follow through on every term of our agreement, though I verified each step myself. In the first week, letters went out to every affected customer at Riverside Community Bank. The letters were professionally written, carefully worded to avoid overt admission of wrongdoing, but they offered full refunds of fees and the option to cancel wealth management contracts with complete reimbursement. Dorothy Kemp received a check for $1,847. Robert Martinez got back $11,234. Helen Pritchard's wealth management contract was canceled and her $178,000 was returned to a standard savings account, with $14,223 in fees refunded. I created a spreadsheet tracking every refund, calling each of the 12 victims I'd identified to confirm they'd received their money. All 12 had. The total refunded, $147,382. In the second week, Derek Hoffman quietly left Riverside Community Bank. I heard through the town grapevine that he'd been promoted to a corporate position in another state, the kind of promotion that's really a firing with a severance package. Thomas Chin disappeared entirely. Jessica Martinez, the teller who'd provided me with the internal documents, got a raise and a new position as assistant branch manager under Derek's replacement. The new branch manager was an older woman named Patricia Orozco, who immediately held a town hall meeting at the senior center to discuss banking services and answer questions. She was professional, straightforward, and refreshingly honest about the changes being implemented. In the third week, the senior center received a $100,000 donation from Vertex Financial for financial literacy programming. I attended the first class, taught by an independent certified financial planner who spent 2 hours explaining how to spot predatory practices, understand fee structures, and protect yourself from financial manipulation. 23 people attended. I sat in the back and said nothing, but I felt a quiet satisfaction watching these people learn how to defend themselves. In the fourth week, I received an anonymous email. No name, no signature, just a message: "Thank you for what you did. I work at a Vertex branch in another town. After your case, corporates sent out new policies prohibiting targeting strategies and requiring full fee disclosures. People are angry about the changes because bonuses are way down, but it needed to happen. You probably saved a lot of people from what almost happened here." I printed that email and put it in my filing cabinet, next to all the other documentation. By the 6th week, I'd verified that all refunds had been issued, all contracts cancelled, all fees reimbursed. I called Martin Torres to confirm that Vertex had met every term of the agreement. "They have," Martin said. "You actually did it, Arthur. You took on a predatory corporation and won. I'm not sure I've seen anything quite like this." "I just held them accountable," I said. "Anyone could have done it if they'd had the evidence and the willingness to follow through." "That's not true, and you know it. Most people would have accepted that first settlement offer. Or they would have gotten scared when threatened with lawsuits. Or they would have taken some money for themselves and walked away. You didn't. You stuck to principle, and you made sure other people were protected. That's rare." After we hung up, I went up to my attic office. It was late afternoon, and the spring sunlight came through the skylight just like it had months ago when I first started investigating. I looked at my filing cabinets, at 40 years of meticulous records, and I thought about what I'd accomplished. I hadn't done this for glory or recognition. The settlement agreement's confidentiality clause meant I couldn't publicly discuss the details. I hadn't done it for money. I'd received nothing personally except my own refunded fees, which totaled less than $3,000. I'd done it because it was right. Because people like Dorothy and Robert and Helen deserved better than to be victimized by corporations that saw them as targets rather than human beings. Because Margaret would have expected me to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. But there was one more thing I needed to do. One final piece that would ensure this victory wasn't just about one town or one bank, but about setting a precedent. 3 months after the settlement, I received a call from a consumer protection advocate in another state. She'd somehow heard about what happened with Vertex Financial, not the details, which were confidential, but enough to know that an elderly customer had successfully fought back against predatory practices. "Mr. Brennan, I'm working with a group of families who believe their elderly parents were victims of similar schemes by their bank. Would you be willing to share your experience? Not the settlement terms, but your approach, how you investigated, what evidence you compiled, how you built your case. I thought about it for a day. The settlement didn't prevent me from sharing my methodology or encouraging others to protect themselves. So I agreed. Over the next few weeks, I created a guide. 23 pages detailing how to spot financial elder abuse, what documentation to collect, which agencies to contact, how to build a comprehensive case. I included templates for filing complaints, checklists for reviewing bank statements, and strategies for dealing with corporate intimidation. I called it, A Guide to Financial Self-Defense for Seniors and Their Families. Martin Torres reviewed it to ensure I wasn't violating the confidentiality agreement. Then I made it freely available online. Within 2 months, that guide had been downloaded over 10,000 times. I started receiving emails from people across the country who'd used my methodology to challenge their own banks. Some won settlements. Some got refunds. Some just scared their banks into stopping predatory practices before they got worse. A law firm specializing in elder financial abuse contacted me to ask if I'd be willing to serve as an expert witness in cases involving predatory banking practices. I agreed, and over the next year, I testified in 3 cases. 2 resulted in settlements favorable to the victims. The third went to trial, and the jury awarded the plaintiff full restitution plus punitive damages. Jessica Martinez, the teller who'd risked her job to help me, eventually became the branch manager of Riverside Community Bank. Under her leadership, the bank developed genuinely helpful programs for elderly customers, free financial counseling, simplified account options, volunteer